Look, there were these Manafort, this week on a related note, Paul Manafort was sentenced to jail this week, and I think he was sentenced for a total, I don't know, 8 years or so. It's about 8 years. Now he could have seen as many as 34 years. So what a significant blow to the Mueller special counsel operation. Now they didn't specifically say they wanted 34 years, but they essentially endorsed the higher ranges of the sentences that could have been imposed. There were 2 cases, one in Virginia that could have seen him go to jail for as long as 24 years, and one in District of Columbia where he could have gone to jail for as long as 10 years on top of that. But instead he was sentenced to about 4 years in each jurisdiction. And the Mueller people were essentially encouraging the courts to throw the book at him. And the judge in Virginia said, look, I'm not going to ignore other cases like this, and he's going to be sentenced accordingly. And the other judge, who was seen as someone not terribly friendly to Paul Manafort, she departed. She didn't throw the book at him either. So think of all the resources that were used to target Paul Manafort. And you would have thought he was the worst criminal since someone from the Gambino crime family or something. It was essentially a tax fraud case. Yeah, it was essentially a tax fraud case. I know they had some material in there about the Foreign Agents Registration Act. In my view, that was just an abusive prosecution. Absolutely abusive. You could make an argument he never really needed to register, but on top of that, the registration issues with FARA had almost always been handled administratively. But not if you're the former campaign manager for President Trump, then they come after you with full guns a-blazing. You know, I've made the point, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, one of the masterminds of 9/11, was nabbed 16 years ago. It's almost 16 years ago this month. And he's still sitting down in Guantanamo Bay. He still hasn't faced full justice. So as our federal government has spent 16 years lollygagging with one of the worst terrorists in the world ever, being unable to figure out a way to convict and execute him, as he probably should be, they're spending all these resources targeting Paul Manafort in an effort to make sure, frankly, to make sure that he would have died in jail. And I'm glad the courts perform the role they should perform in terms of providing a check on this abusive prosecution of Paul Manafort. But the abuses continue. New York, they're trying to prosecute Manafort on essentially the same charges, specifically with the idea that they want to still put him in jail in case President Trump pardons him. I mean, that's banana republic type of activity. I mean, that ought to be disturbing to you if you're a conservative, if you're a liberal, if you're a Democrat, if you're a Republican. You know, and if you're a liberal, put your anti-Trump bias away and use your head and look at this from a constitutional perspective. This is not an issue about whether or not you like President Trump. It's whether or not you want our government to abuse some people and protect others based on politics.